on?
It's on.
Okay.
I'm about to set it off right now. I'm about to set it off. Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. I hope everybody is staying healthy and staying safe during our Safer at Home. I am excited to do this power couple video with Kofi. We haven't done one in a while, but this one hopefully will be worth the wait. Worth the wait. So funny, because I had this great thought. I was like, we need to do a video about things that we argue about. Because, you know, I want to pursue authenticity. And then my loving husband just gave me so much material. Like, this is how he supports. You want to do a video about things that we argue about? I am going to create so many opportunities for us to argue so that you have excellent...
I'm going to be the loving husband that I always
excellent content.
Patience, mind my business.
Content.
Time to be the loving husband and father. And boom.
I know that a lot of people, there have been a lot of jokes and everything, a lot of conversations about how, you know, it can be tough being quarantined at home all day, every day with your significant other and children and the like. And I will say, on the whole, it's been a pretty decent experience, but all day, every day can, you know, wear down even the strongest.
Don't try to blame it on Corona. This is how she was before. We're going to talk about the real
how I was.
Please.
I was, so you know, we've been social distancing and Kofi's had to distance himself all the way to the couch. This video is about things that we argue about. All right, so if you're new to my channel and you don't know Kofi and I should say we have been married for, it'll be 14 years this year. And we've known each other for about 17 years. And we have 2 children, an 11-year-old daughter and a 7-year-old son. But we've supported each other through a lot of individual successes and joint successes. But we're also, you know, still a real couple dealing with the growth and the growing pains that come with just being a real couple. So we wanted to capture a little bit of that. We have a couple of other videos that you guys can check out in this playlist on my channel that's called Power Couple Tips. Kofi and I were named a Los Angeles Power Couple by Angelino Magazine for back-to-back consecutive years. So that's what was that was the impetus to start this channel and share some information for other couples and families. But again, 100% authenticity is what we want to pursue. There are things that we do really well, and then there are places where we still have opportunities to grow. And you know, I'm saying we, but y'all already know. All right, so we're just gonna kick it off with things that we argue about.
How much time do you guys have? How much time? Is this a 5-part series? This is a 5-part series?
You know what? Say what you need to say. Say what you need to say, because at the end of the day, I do the editing. So say what you need to say.
Exactly. I think that, you know, there's been a transition through our marriage in terms of the things that we argue about, and it's you know, in part early on, it's really even just adjusting to another person and getting to know another person's personality, understanding their hot buttons, having them find more of your hot buttons, and you know, really just trying to survive that part of the relationship. You know, and I don't know that any long-term marriages have not had a few bumps here and there, and some have more than others. And I think, you know, early on we had more than our fair share of challenges and arguments. And if you asked me early on, I'd have been like, no, we're not gonna make it. There's just no way. But, you know, I think a couple things happened, and I'll still talk about more specifics, but a couple things happened during that phase. And one was, I started asking myself, is this something I'm gonna leave her over, right? And I think that changed my perspective on a lot of the things that we argued about. So, you know, we weren't arguing about like infidelity, or we weren't arguing about just lying, or, you know, we did have some trust challenges because trust was still being built, but there were no actual violations of that trust. There was no sort of, you know, evil wrongdoing. It was more just, again, adjusting to each other's personalities, each other's hot buttons, and you know, going through those growing pains. So
yeah, I agree. And I would say that, like, for me personally, I think my moral convictions are pretty much on adultery, abuse, and addiction. Like, those are the three things that are kind of the deal breakers for me. And we haven't broached, you know, those situations in this relationship. So the rest of it really does boil down to, again, just that growth, forgiveness, communication, those kinds of things that are just part of the process that marriage is about. You know, I had someone ask me before, I think it was around our 10th wedding anniversary, oh, like, what's the secret to staying married? And I just kind of blurted out, we were at an art show actually, and I just kind of blurted out, oh, I think that when you realize that marriage is more about your own walk with God than what's really going on with the other person, then you can kind of get yourself into a rhythm. So what I mean by that is I just feel like, you know, there are all these like fruits of the spirit, these things that we're trying to pursue, being patient, being kind, being forgiving, being gracious, being sacrificial. So all of that is like part of this spiritual journey and trying to be a better person. And I think you get the chance to really become a better person even more quickly in the context of a relationship. You have someone who's going to challenge you. You may think you're patient, but when you actually live with someone, you're going to find out if you're really patient. You may think so many things about yourself, or you may have blind spots to places where your character needs to change. But that's kind of what I would say is like the, you know, making the case for marriage in general. I do think it helps you grow and mature in different ways.
Just to finish my last statement too about, you know, the questions I would ask, and, you know, is this something you're going to leave the person over? I think the second thing is, then how much time are you going to take to get past it or move on, right? So you can hold a grudge for a month, you can hold it for a week, or you can hold it for a few hours, right? And if you know that at the end of that time period, you're not going to leave, and then you have a choice to make. And it's something that, you know, I think we've taken those time frames down, and made them incrementally smaller.
I was, you know, giving a little bit of thought to this, like trying to figure out like what are the things that we really argue about. And I was trying to see if I could find like a strong theme. I know that finances is something that a lot of couples really argue about, but I don't really think that's a strong one for us. I don't think that that would be a thematic thing, but I think for us it probably boils down to more communication challenges.
It's definitely a communication thing. Most arguments are a communication thing. It's, you know, and I've given the examples, and I honestly believe them to be true of, you know, the difference in how men and women communicate. You know, you read about it in books, and a lot of it's cliche, and then so much of it shows up in real life in your relationship or your marriage. And, you know, a couple of the things do really boil down to those basic cliches of trust and security, right? And respect. Like, so for me, a lot of it's about the respect and, you know, feeling respected. And for her, a lot of it's about security and feeling appreciated and feeling secure. How it gets communicated though, I think that's where things just fall apart at times, right? Where, you know, there's been times where we've argued because we've just been on totally different pages of communication, you know, where I'll say, well, babe, 1 + 1 is 2. And then the next day we're arguing and she's saying, well, you said 1 + 1 is 4. I'm like, that's not what I said. But that's how she heard the information and that's how she felt the information. And I'm like, that's just not what I said, right? Or she'll, you know, we'll have a different type of conversation where there's an expectation that the other person actually understands what you said. So I might say something and I think she understands it, but I didn't communicate it the right way for her to understand it. Or she says something to me where I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then I'll ask her, well, how am I supposed to know that? And she'll say, I don't know. You're supposed to know. And I was like, what are you talking about? If you don't know, how am I supposed to know? So yeah, let's keep it real. But I think early on, it was really about just building more trust and building more of that feeling of security and not letting other people shake it. So we used to argue about that, you know, about other people's behaviors that had nothing to do with my behavior, that had nothing to do with her behavior, but all of a sudden we're arguing about it. And I'm just like, why are we arguing about some drunk person's comment at a birthday party or something? Like, what is this? Like, what is really going on? Is this really about us? You know, and it's not. And even fast forwarding to now, you know, I don't know if you have some specific examples. Again, how many parts of this are there?
Yeah.
7-part
It's
series,
ongoing,
9-part
indefinite.
series, and we're both alpha personalities. So I think that that's the other big challenge in the way that arguments can escalate if you're both dominant personalities.
Yeah, we are both A-type personalities, and I think that on the one hand, I think there's something positive about that. So if you're in a relationship where you have 2 alpha-type personalities, what's good is I think probably more gets communicated, and there's probably more authenticity and more speaking up on certain things. But again, the challenge becomes figuring out exactly how to communicate effectively so it doesn't transition into an argument or into that contest of alpha personalities. All right, so I do think something that's probably really relatable that we also are still sorting out is just the roles and responsibilities. And part of that too is just because of our lifestyle, and there's a lot of transition in our lifestyle. So, we've gone from a situation where I was a full-time student to, where Kobe's a part-time student who's working, so I'm a part-time student who's working, and now we have kids. And so there's just been so many different transitions in the different stages across our relationship. So it's not like we kind of established a certain kind of role that kind of works or has worked consistently for 14 years. So I think, even as the kids change and those dynamics change and I go into work or out of work or transition to doing different things, it all kind of requires a flexibility and a transition in what the responsibilities and roles are going to be in our household. So I think that's constantly being negotiated and managed with varying degrees of success. Varying degrees of success. So another experience that we've had, I wouldn't say it's a major theme, but it is something that's come up, and I, have even recently talked to a couple of other younger couples about this. I think that something that's risky and can create arguments is if, like Kofi was saying, you let other people's chatter or conversation impact your relationship, not just in the example that he gave of maybe somebody saying something like at a party or an event or at a bar or something where it can kind of create, I don't know, jealousy or some sort of mistrust. But even sometimes I think a risk that couples have is allowing people to create or carry or perpetuate a narrative about their partner that isn't necessarily true, but might be flattering or empowering to you. So, you get what I'm saying?
I do, because we've talked about it, but you have to explain it again.
Right.
They're confused right now.
They're confused. So what I mean is, for example, I could, because I do the homeschooling and I take the lead on the kids, I could kind of lean into a narrative about me being primarily responsible and Kofi not really helping and blah, 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 in an attempt to kind of elevate what I feel like is the perception of my role as a mom, for example, where that's something that in seeking some sort of validation or some sort of narrative about what my role is in the home, I can do it at the risk of, the narrative about him and his participation. And I do think that that's something that happens often. I feel like it has happened before in our relationship, in both ways, on both sides. So I do think that that's something to also guard against. It's really about understanding what is the most productive and positive narrative that you want to kind of lean into and support for your spouse as well, and making sure that you aren't perpetuating a different narrative for your own benefit. That makes sense.
That makes sense.
Yeah. All right. Something that I think probably a lot of couples relate to is just, feeling like if you're the partner that stays at home or you're managing more of what's going on with the kids' responsibilities, the other person doesn't really totally get the full scope of everything that you're managing. So that's a constant negotiation. And it's just something that although it frustrates me, I am still trying to give grace and provide the opportunity for growth and support. But that's a topic, that's a theme. That's a theme that comes up, here and there.
I think the other interesting thing about that too is something that I also kind of discovered along the way is asking the right questions and figuring out what specifically the other person thinks they need, right? Or feels like they need. Because you may assume that they need one thing, and it may seem like an obvious way to help or support that person, and it's really not. It's not what they need. So I think, that's something that I've tried to do a little bit better, especially around this idea of roles and responsibilities. Because it's never 50-50. Life is never 50-50. Like, even if you live by yourself, you're not going to split your time 50-50 between work and your personal life. It's never quite balanced, but it has to make sense for your relationship. But I think just having that open communication, so if the person says, you know what, I just need these, if you do these 3 things for me, it's going to make my day or my life that much easier. And sometimes those 3 things are even easier than what you thought you were going to help them with from your own observation. So
I would say another thing that's not really a thematic subject that we argue about, but it's kind of a theme of the arguing is we both are a bit temperamental. And I would say I don't feel like I'm a person who's quick to anger, but once I'm there. So I think that's also part of the challenge. It kind of goes back to the A-type personality, but beyond even the A-type personality, I have some hot buttons. And it's funny because if you know me, I'm not really the kind of person, like, I don't argue with people much. I just, especially people I don't know, I don't argue with people I don't know. Because usually I don't really see it worth arguing. The only thing is like my kids though, like, so that's about the only thing where I will really show up and show out. And also off the soccer field. If it has nothing to do with soccer, it has nothing to do with my kids, I'm probably not gonna argue with people. Cutting me off in traffic, that kind of stuff doesn't really get to me. But once I reach that point, I feel like that's something that I'm still also working on.
No. She's gonna start a fight.
Let's go!
Exactly.
And then I would say actually you're the one who's a bit more hot-headed than I am.
I disagree. I think in general, in life...
This is definitely going to get edited.
In general, in life...
In general, in life.
I tend to be the one that I will react if somebody honks and gives me the finger on the freeway.
Yes.
Not much anymore, but I used to be that way. But what I will say in terms of the hot-headedness of us, I think it's also important to communicate early because I think sometimes once it gets to that point, for us in particular, it's almost like certain arguments are inevitable, and so and I know for you, and you can tell everyone what you think. Once you get to that point, it is like, okay, I want to just argue. I want to argue at this point. I want to release of emotions.
It's
right?
tough. It's tough because, I will acknowledge that I'm kind of a stuffer. So there are many things that I don't necessarily communicate on in real time. Sometimes that's just for busyness or, I just don't feel like I have the space to have the conversation that I need to have. And I'm like, whatever. But then if things build, then it kind of reaches that point where all of it, matter and energy are neither created or destroyed. So if you don't communicate early, it's going to come, it's going to come out at some point. So I think that sometimes there's
it comes and it comes.
And there's a big swell. I'll acknowledge.
And then I turn green. I was gonna say.
There's a big swell. But I think, again, I wouldn't say I'm conflict avoidant, but I do think that probably the space where I need to grow more is having that conversation or attempting that conversation earlier, having that communication. But, in my defense, I do think that sometimes it depends, I try to be compassionate to the nature of Kofi's business. It can be stressful. I'm these clients can be stressful, a lot can be stressful. And so I'm trying to do a negotiation where I'm is it really worth bringing this up at this time often? So that makes it tough. It makes it tough because I think there are other pressures and stressors, and for the most part, I'm not trying to be, I don't think I nag. I don't think I nag. No, I'm I'm not like a nagger. I'm not like a nagging kind of personality. Like I said, I try to not really make things out of nothing. But I do feel like if it matters to me and if I'm feeling like I'm not being heard, that's risky. That's risky. If I'm trying to say something and if I'm trying to broach it in different ways and I'm not being heard for whatever reason, then, you know, I have the capacity to make myself heard. I think the bottom line is, you know, all couples are gonna argue. We argue. We've had some good ones. But you just gotta stay committed. Know that it's a process. Try to create some sort of boundaries for the argument if possible. Lean on help. We have a great pastor who does, like, you know, he's a really great supportive figure in our relationship, so that's something that we lean on too. And you know, I think that over time you kind of get yourself into a rhythm where there aren't as many arguments, and you know, hopefully the arguments aren't on any, you know, really strong central theme over time as well. It's just more of like a communication thing. I think that that's probably a key.
Yeah, and it's a process, you know, because everybody's personalities are different, everybody's relationships are different, and we've made just insane progress in this category. I think our challenge moving forward is when we do have arguments, not to let it escalate, you know, so that's what we'll continue to work on. And then I'll just add, you know, having support around you, you know, those people who are your friends or call themselves your friends, or if you're married, those people who were at your wedding, you should be able to lean on those people. And if not, they shouldn't have been at your wedding, right? So you've got to have people that you can call that aren't just, you know, just Team Kofi. Well, they're Team Kofi because they want to see us succeed. So they're not going to just, you know, pile it on her and be like, oh, that's terrible. They're going to talk me through it. They're going to ask me, what about my role? What about my responsibilities? And they're going to help me grow. And, you know, you've got to hope that your spouse has the same thing in their ear. You know, people who are supportive, they're supportive of relationships. They want to see the relationship succeed. Because the worst thing is to, you know, you have that friend who you will call and they'll just pile it on. Like, I told you.
No, that's funny. That is actually a really good point, because I swear to you, I don't think I've had an argument with Kofi where my parents were like, it's your fault. I'm like,
because
what?
It is.
Hello?
Because it is.
Hello?
Exactly.
Who's on the phone? So yeah, and you know, again, it's just that kind of perspective and accountability that is super helpful.
Yep.
Okay, and one other point that I kind of wanted to bring up is that we don't often argue in front of our kids. Like, they will see us have disagreements, but if it's like a really serious and intense argument, that's not something that we do before our kids. I think there's a balance that we're trying to strike between letting them know that there can be like conflict and dissonance in relationship. Like, that's normal and that's healthy. But you know, if it's getting wild, that's not really developmentally appropriate for them. So that's something that usually we'll wait till like after bedtime to continue.
But I also think it's important to be honest, you know, to a certain extent, like to the maturity level of your kids, right? The kids are too little, they just won't understand anyway. But like, our daughter's 11. So you can't sit here and pretend that we don't have arguments, and we don't have moments. So it's better to shoot straight and say, well, we had an argument, you know, mommy made me mad, or I made mommy mad, and you know, we still love each other, but I just need to come downstairs and sit by myself for a little bit, create a little bit of space. And sometimes with your friends, you'll have the same thing happen, or people that you're close to. You have arguments, right? And you create a little space, a little time to cool off or chill out, and then come back together. But I think it's good to, you know, not for them to see, you know, the arguments. You know, we don't want to have that happen in front of them. You know, that's never. You
don't want to traumatize them. If
but
it's like
but I think for the kids, at least in the things I've read, you know, I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist, but it's about knowing you have a secure
foundation, right?
And so we just always want to reassure them that, you know, daddy's not going anywhere, mommy's not going anywhere. We're here. We're in different rooms right now because whatever, but we're here, you know, and we love you guys, and none of it is ever because of you guys or your fault, you know. So you want to make sure that they're they're feeling safe in the environment.
Right. Yeah, for the most part, I actually think that it's like, again, kind of healthy and productive to have some sort of, disagreement. I think our pastor has said before, if you're always, in agreement, somebody's lying. So, and actually the other night when we were watching Ozark, I know the old guy that's living in the house said to the couple, he was like, if I had it out with my wife like that, we might still be together. So I think it's about having the courage and the persistence to be able to kind of walk through the fire so that you are, stronger and refined on the other end of that.
Try to keep the levels of the fire not too high.
Right.
And you can't have years and years and years of no progress. And the progress starts with you personally. So it's like our expectation is that the other person is going to change. But really we have to focus on how do we change. And inevitably, the other person will change. If they don't change with you, they're going to change with somebody else. So the person is going to change, but focus on what you can handle. Figuring out those measures of patience, those measures of grace that you can implement into these situations. But yeah, I do think it's good to have healthy discussions and, challenge each other in good ways.
And something else that I will bring up is, I think through the early part of our marriage, especially when we were having so much intense conflict, I did spend a lot of time doing quite a bit of research on marriage, on successful marriages. And
on how to beat your husband in arguments. I saw her Google searches. It's ridiculous.
But I bring that up to say that there's so many things that we invest our time in learning, like in terms of, what professionally, or making ourselves a better person in certain ways, self-help. But, if your marriage is supposed to be a forever kind of thing, it deserves a high level of commitment and investment, even in terms of this research. Kind of same thing as as a mom, there's so much there's so much research and work that goes into figuring out how to help support your kids' development. And your relationship is something that needs a lot of support to develop as well.
Last thing, look at her hand. No ring.
Oh, this is something that we argue about.
No, don't try to bring it up now. Wait. I wanted to point this out because this is something, I have this ring on, right? I've got a ring on. It's one of these silicone bands.
Is this the ring that I got him? You guys should see the ring that I actually got him.
It's a symbol of our love, okay?
Whose love?
Secondly,
who loves you? Who got you this?
We've had arguments about this, but I have a beautiful wedding ring that I actually had to have repaired and fixed. If you see my fingers a little bit, my knuckles a little bit, big. I had a football injury when I played football, and so my wedding ring is hard to get on and off, but I've had it, remedied, now I can get on and off, but I had it scratched up, I've had, stones fall out, and so when I'm doing housework, when I'm doing stuff at the gym, whatever it is, I needed something that can go with me, where I can still represent this one right here. Takes issue with that. And what? Let's even ask. I don't know why. Well, why are you not wearing your ring?
I am safer at home. I am
What does that have to do with wearing your ring?
Sanitizing my hands and moisturizing my hands all day, every day.
Safer at home, not single at home. Safer at home. Look at this.
I am safer at home. And so I'm not wearing any of my jewelry on my hands because I'm washing my hands so frequently.
Oh, that's what it is?
That's what it is.
So if I wash my hands frequently, I don't need to wear a ring?
That's what it is. I don't know why you don't wear your
I wear
ring.
my ring.
I don't know why you don't wear
I wear my ring.
This is a rubber band.
Yeah.
This is a rubber band.
I'm safer at home.
Exactly.
I'm
yes,
safer at home.
but this is, you didn't just get this. This is what you do.
Yeah.
So it's not what I tend to do, but I'm
I
not
wear my
going
actual
anywhere.
ring. Let's be clear. I wear my actual ring 75% of the time. But wow, look at the close-up. This scene stealer. But this preserves my ring. That's it. One day I'll show you guys my ring. It's really cool now that it's been fixed too. It's very cool. And if all else fails, it's Tinder.